Great. So thanks a lot for having us this morning. Our panel basically focused on the issue of Israel as global innovations and a global beta site for healthcare. During the last days, I think we had here fascinating sessions on a lot of different issues around the healthcare system. We had a session on how could the society be more healthier, how this business landscape actually is changing, and so we had a panel on new mechanisms for financial innovation, a lot of perspectives, a lot of ideas. I think if there is one consensus in this conference that we are experiencing a huge paradigm shift in the healthcare system, something really fundamental changing, and this change is a very important aspect for our capacity to sustain the healthcare systems around the world. It's not about one drug, it's not about one technology, it's about basically a new operating system to this important need. During this panel, I hope that we'll be able to present you a few ideas of how this paradigmatic change can take place, and without actually focusing on a specific area, whether it's a prediction or personalized medicine, we would like to focus on the system itself, how the system could be shaped in order to make sure that the innovation will be much more effective, much faster, hopefully much cheaper, and hopefully will lead to a much wider impact of a quality of life worldwide. In order to deal with this modest quest, I think we brought here a lot of different angles of this healthcare system. We have with us Ms. Yulia Eitan, Deputy Head National Economic Council of the Israeli Prime Minister Office. We have Professor Chaim Bitterman, Chief Medical Officer of the Clalit Healthcare Services, the biggest Israeli healthcare provider. We have with us Mr. Gary Jacobs, Managing Director of Jacobs Investment and Company. And we have Professor Roger Stein, Chief Analytics Officer and MIT Sloan School of Management Professor. Basically, the situation is, as you know, is pretty straightforward. Governments, foundations, corporates investing billions of dollars in research and development and creating new solutions, new ideas, and trying to bring them into the market. Yet, while we have a huge amount of knowledge, the impact of this knowledge on the quality of healthcare system around the world is pretty much limited. And it's a huge question. How can we take this knowledge? How can we take existing technologies or non-existing technologies, and how can we take all these capacities and actually transform them and make sure that we are making much safer, much more effective, and hopefully much more equal healthcare systems, both here in Israel and around the world. And the first question I would like to refer to Professor Bitterman. In this changing landscape, and as someone who actually responsible for the healthcare quality of 52% of the Israeli population, how this environment impact on your activity?
Thank you. Maybe I'll use the slide number 22 as a beginner. Okay, now this slide is obviously not needed because it summarizes the atmosphere in which we all live, whether we are Israelis, Americans, or any other healthcare system. And the basic notion is that we all understand that the era of shifting more and more money into healthcare either ended or is going to end, and that most countries of the world are trying to bend the curve of increasing costs. And the question is, which tools are available for us to do it? This could begin a long and tedious lecture on various tools, but most authorities understand and believe that one thing which has been dealt with rather extensively yesterday is that preventive medicine and prevention should get a lot of attention, and it's not the subject of our discussion today. The other thing is that another tool which everybody is aiming to use and to use more efficiently is to use mega data banks which are available for us, for some of us, will be available for all of us in the coming future, how to use it efficiently in order to develop new methods of care delivery, how to do it in order to develop new tools, new intervention programs, how to implement them, how to follow them, to measure them, to evaluate, to change them if needed, and to do a better job for less money and a more efficient and sustainable way. And as a background, I will end up with the last sentence here, stating that more than ever before, the sustainability of healthcare system depends on an effective innovation environment. And the next slide I would like, the last one I would like to use is number 24, please. Coming up, okay. And to go with you in a few minutes to go to tell you our own story as a relatively large healthcare organization in the Israeli proportions, obviously. And what did we do in the last 5 years which convinced us that it's doable? So those of you who don't know the Israeli healthcare system, it's a universal coverage of 100% of the population, and healthcare is delivered by 4 healthcare organizations. They are not HMOs, they are both the insurer and the provider. Clalit is the largest one of them, with a 52% market share, more than 4 million members. Due to a variety of historical reasons, Clalit membership represents vast ethnic and socioeconomic diversity and overrepresentation of chronic conditions. For instance, we take care of 75% of the 500,000 diabetics in the country, and there are clear-cut reasons why it happened, meaning that our exposure to the main key issue of modern medical systems, namely chronic conditions and aging populations, is even more than our market share. We do it by operating around 2,000 community clinics. Community medicine in Israel is very strong in all other healthcare organizations as well. But in contrast to the other healthcare organizations, we also own public hospitals. 14 public hospitals. Altogether, we own and operate 30% of the country's hospital beds, and we have 40,000 employees. Each one of them, being an Israeli, is an innovator in potential. And should be encouraged to do so. At least many of them are. The strange thing about the health system in Israel, that when they do surveys of satisfaction levels, 90 and more than 90% of the citizens of Israel state that they are either happy or very happy with their system. Okay, that's an interesting story, but it means that they stick to the same organization for all their life most of the time. And there is you can switch from one organization to the other with a click of a button in the internet 6 times a year. You can do it, and nobody can refuse you joining their organization. And since people are so happy, less than 2% of the people do it. In our focus today, this means that most people stick to the same healthcare organization from the day they are born to, unfortunately, the day they die, from cradle to death, as we say. Now, our predecessors were clever enough to launch and to implement the use of a single EMR system in the community at the late 1980s. So since the 1990s, we have a lot of medical information, a lot of data, starting with community clinics, and then nowadays, including data from hospitals, laboratories, socioeconomic data, and some data on education. It's all ID-tagged, geocoded data on 4 million people from cradle to death, from cradle to end of life, okay? And this is a commodity which we think is very unique. It's not going to be very unique for many years because other systems will have similar stuff, but even when all the others will have it, will still have the depth of 20 years backward information. And the last 5 years were a very interesting journey of how to use this data. And I'll summarize in 1 or 2 more minutes. We started a research institute, and we gathered together a very intelligent group of epidemiologists, statisticians, data miners, data analyzers, and they really trained themselves to use this huge data bank to do a number of things. One, we posed the questions. So the healthcare organization was the catalyst for the questions. It's not that some inventor invented something for some bizarre condition. We came up with the questions. Now they had to come up with the answers. One, in one direction was real-life research, and I don't have to explain to this audience what's the difference between the current research methods with drugs in pharmaceuticals, in technologies, versus real-life data. The other thing was data-driven decision-making. And the third line of work, which they did very successfully, it was predictive modeling. And I'll just give you just one simple example of predictive modeling, which was done successfully and which we are very happy with. As you know, readmission to hospitals is a major problem in all medical systems. Now, the numbers for the United States are that more than 23 or 24% of people discharged from hospital, from internal medicine wards, are being readmitted within less than 30 days. Now, that's a huge medical problem. It's a huge medical issue and a financial issue as well. And all countries in the world are trying to reduce this readmission rate. Israel started at the lower level, 17 to 18%, but it's a major issue. So those people were confronted with the question, and they came up with an algorithm, with a prediction model, in which we can detect who are more prone for readmission. So now we designed an intervention program, which is a very low-tech program, in which a nurse from the community comes to the hospital. She gets a list of patients who were identified by this not-so-simple algorithm on the day of admission, that they carry a 5 times higher chance, higher risk of readmission. So she's not dealing with all hospitalized patients, just with 10% of the people. And she makes sure that they get the medication on the last day, they get the explanations, they know how to take the medication, and that their family physician will see them within less than a week. Okay? A real-life problem, a very low-tech solution based on a high-tech, let's call it algorithm or intervention model. And less than a year since the implementation of this tool, readmission rate dropped by 5%. Now, I don't know if it's sustainable, if not, but it's 1 year. I could go on, but I'll skip the other examples. If we'll have some more time, I'll give you some of them. But altogether, having tasted the taste of really having access to the data, putting some intelligence guys to look at it, to come up with tools, we could use our other advantage. The other advantage is that it's a centrally ruled, centrally governed, centrally directed organization, and we could design intervention programs and employ them and assimilate them and use them almost with a click of a button. And then we can follow them either on a miniature pilot kind of studies or large-scale studies. And the other examples are large-scale. I don't want to take too much time of the panel. So altogether, we are now at a point in which we realize that this effort should be multiplied by orders of magnitude. The availability of data, the know-how how to get into it, onto this treasure, and dig it out, should meet a large number of entrepreneuring agencies, people, smart people who come up with solutions based on our ability to dig the data, to use it, and to expose it, unidentified, whatever, data to other people. And we are now at the point in which we are planning in 2015, we'll have time, I'll talk about it later, and with this I'll finish. We are planning on really starting a large enterprise in which our data will be available, hopefully, to 100, 200, 300 entrepreneurs, the more the merrier. Thank you.
Wonderful. Can I have slide 23, please? I guess that we heard the basis of this paradigm shift, in which, if in the old innovation system we got used to the idea that we are creating great technologies or great science, this great technology goes to the developers and then somehow goes to the market. Let's call it a market as a receptor. Here we have a wonderful situation in which you actually. It's not the right. Sorry.
That's the one I will use if you give me time.
Sorry.
You say 23? 23, please.
Yeah, 23, I said.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, yeah. Here we have and the next button, pop. Yeah, again. Thank you. Here we have a wonderful example. How can we take this market, which basically can supply us with the needs as entrepreneurs, can give us his infrastructures, can serve as an effective beta site, and having designed properly can dramatically accelerate this innovation process. And we, of course, discuss it a bit further on during the panel. Mr. Jacobs, under this new operating system of the healthcare innovation, can you please reflect a bit about your investment and even about your philanthropic activity? How should it take place under these new conditions?
Well, even under the old conditions or the new conditions, the key that's there is the human capital. So how are you going to continually create and reinvent new education methods for upcoming new entrepreneurs, new innovators, new doctors, and so on, who are going to be able to take all this big data information and create something with it. Under the old traditional models of teachers being the content provider, they're the ones that have to constantly get new information, new content, and so on in order to try and pass it along to their students. Under this new model, the reality is that the teachers needs to be acting as the facilitator and let the students actually find this information and start to understand how do you actually find the problem to create a solution to it, not just create and not just solve a problem, but actually find the problem. How do you work in teams? How do you work and present? And how do you continue to want to keep learning, not just have it done and done once? So the key really here is and what we do with our philanthropy is really in the education field, primarily in the K-12 institutions. We're doing a lot of work here in charter schools in San Diego, again about student engagement and project-based learning, real-world solutions and real-world problems that they're working on, DNA barcoding to help prosecute poachers in Tanzania, helping UCSD engineering students with a low-cost way in order to track their CO2 emissions from the upper atmosphere. But again, it's how do you start to get these K-12 students really excited and engaged in this education and this new model, because they've grown up with all this new technology. You know, if you ask them what a record is or an LP is, they have absolutely no idea because they've never seen one before. Or even somebody was telling me the other day they have a cassette tape, but they don't have a cassette player anymore to play it on. So these new students and young people coming up have all this information, have all this technology, and they're the ones that know how to consume it. And we need to change them to be just being consumers of all this in order to being providers and creators of this technology and this new in this new environment, because they're the ones then will be able to decipher all this big data and move forward.
Wonderful. So we took the market, meaning the providers, and trying to design them as effective catalysts. We're talking about bringing education into the picture in order to make sure that under this new paradigms we have the right people with the right skills to promote it. And of course, finance. Finance is an important thing. Professor Stein, can you please refer a bit to the big challenges of what actually should we think about while trying to boost these processes?
Sure. So this is a panel about big data. I'm sort of the outlier because I'm talking about finance and not about medicine or education or anything like that.
You are basically the only one who knows something about big data.
No,
all of us,
you
so
know
it's
the
okay.
If you do work with big data, you know that when you find an outlier, it means one of two things. Either it's a really interesting data point or it's wrong. And so you guys can decide after I speak which one of those you think I am. But actually, we did some work in a very specific area looking at funding biomedical research. And in that area in particular, there's a real problem bringing ideas from the laboratory or the bench to the bedside. So taking ideas from the lab that look promising and getting them into patients' hands. And the reason is it's a very long process, it's very risky, and most of the time it doesn't work. But it requires lots of funding along the way. And these are not the kinds of projects that typically people find attractive. On top of that, the returns for specialist funds that do this, venture capital funds and private equity funds and such, have been pretty poor over the last 10 years or so. This year's a little bit different, but in general, between -1% and 1% return, annualized, which is, again, not an attractive not an attractive investment proposition. And so what happens is a lot of the financing that would normally go to funding some of these early projects is going to fund other types of shorter term, more reliable, more certain technologies like big data and so forth. And the problem with that is that it puts the scientists in this odd position of not being able to do the research they want to do, but having to choose a research project that they think can get funded. In the case of a cancer drug, for example, it takes about $1.5 billion to make a cancer drug, and it takes about 10 or 11 years. Most cancer drugs are not successful. There's about a 5% success rate. That makes it a very unattractive investment, right? And a big part of this problem is that the amount of capital that's required to do this funding is very large, but the number of entities that could do this privately, say venture capital funds and so on, is small. And so the work that we did was really around trying to figure out if there's an alternative funding mechanism that wouldn't rely on the small pools of venture capital, but that could instead rely on large pools of capital from the capital markets. And the work that we did demonstrated the feasibility of pooling large numbers of these projects into a single portfolio and then investing in that portfolio as an asset rather than as a philanthropic endeavor or scientific endeavor. So if we have time later, I'll talk a bit about that.
Great. Mrs. Eitan, you're the policymaker here. And I think now that we're all convinced that innovation is an important aspect in healthcare systems, what is the role of the government in this game?
Thank you, Leonid, and thank you for being with us. I think it's a very interesting issue to discuss, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. I think that the idea of creating better lives for citizens is some kind of fundamental idea of many governments when we are coming to the policy-making point. And there is no doubt that healthcare and health condition of the citizens is a major indicator for their well-being. And it's the point where we come into the picture and asking ourselves, how can we promote and what can be done in this area? But you know, there is a lot of areas that are important to people, and it does not mean that the government has to intervene or we do have a specific role. And I think that healthcare innovation system is something different. In this case, we do have clear criteria which make us to understand that it's worth our intervening, and it's kind of situation where there is a competitive advantage of government becoming an enabler and the navigator of some kind of ecosystem around the healthcare innovation. And you know, these criteria are kind of rules that we are asking ourselves, keep asking ourselves if they do exist in the areas. And I would suggest for you to understand a little bit how we are thinking about this kind of problems and or questions. First of all, we want to be sure that there is a clear local need of this industry. Once we decide that we want to be part of some kind of ecosystem, do we really have a local need? And in this case, there is no doubt there is. Do Israel has any chance to become some kind of, to earn a global position and to put the Israel at a global position, at a global arena as a player now or in the future? I think that the answer is yes. It's very young, not mature arena. There is a lot of possibilities to come, and it's a good time for us to enter the market and to try to create a strategic move in toward this vector. And we do have a great coalition of players, Israeli and global, who are interested and want to make, you know, you have to have some NGOs, some philanthropic, some industry, real industry coming in, finance and government as an enabler, and which can provide the right regulation and right incentives in order to promote the idea of better side of innovation.
Great. So I guess you are describing a really clear process of let's support linear processes of innovation in which we will put some money in the universities, we'll share a bit of a risk with the entrepreneur, and then the rest will come. Not that those things are not important, Right now we're talking about adding another layer of policy, which basically focusing on much more specific ecosystem of say, healthcare. What should it take to make sure that, first of all, this ecosystem will be an effective one, a competitive one, and what should it take in order to take this ecosystem and basically position it within the global arena, because what to do? This is the global arena and this is a global game. And basically, when we're talking about these issues, we're talking about few tools that right now has been developed under the government, if I may say so. How can the government and the industry and all these partners together can support, first of all, the healthcare providers basically to become an effective catalyst? Because it's nice to talk about it, but no one actually designed this organization to do so. And basically in Israel right now, it's pretty intensive process which takes place to actually do these kind of things. What could be the right models of creating this critical infrastructure? Because the fact that we do have all this data doesn't say that it's data accessible for wide-scale research and development initiatives. Usually this data historically has been designed for financial reasons. Now it has been used for therapeutic reasons, but still, in order to do big data analysis, someone have to take this data, bring it to some other place, secure, de-identify, and so on and so forth, and actually open it to the world. And of course, different tools of community development. How can we take all these wide cycles of people, researchers, developers, investors, doctors, policymakers, and bring them all together and actually, let's use a fancy word of create the social capital in which they actually can operate effectively, which is pretty fascinating policy perspective, I think. Okay, so now
I think that we have a great experience in that. The fact that Israel has some kind of startup nation reputation is not only because of our entrepreneurs or government or finance industry doing the right thing. It's about coming together and creating all these things that you are talking about. So once we have this experience, I think we can expand into other areas, of course updating this, but government is an enabler. It's part of coalition, and there must be some kind of interest and motivation coming from all the parts of this equation, which can meet next to the table.
Well, I guess Israel has a very interesting history in using innovation to solve problems.
Right.
I mean, we had pretty bad security issues. We created a very effective innovation system for security. We didn't have water. We did it. So basically what we should do is take all these nice things in life, and then Israel will create effective innovation systems.
Will come to solve. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess one of the most important things in this innovation system eventually is the capacity to create enough small players to start different ideas. Because as you all understand, these variations, these initial parts that actually starting to move, it's okay that most of them are not actually reaching the market, but still, if we actually can create a wide scope of these initiatives, so those who will stay basically will change our life. I guess a good example for that is this kind of innovation. I mean, we're not creating here big drugs that are changing the world, and most of the things here are basically going to, if I may say so, to the garbage, but those who are actually changing our life. And it's a wonderful platform that I guess, Israel and all the innovation system can learn from, because we have here a platform so each entrepreneur, each innovator can add just his own 2 cents and not create everything. The feedback loops to the market are very effective. So if I should try to summarize what we're trying to achieve by building Israel as a beta site in different areas, and this time we're focusing on health, is something like that. And not to say that we don't need big, important inventions. I would say that these platforms can accelerate those also, but let's focus on the initial aspects. Let's focus on the development process of these companies. Mr. Jacobs, practically, under this landscape in which we actually can take a lot of entrepreneurs with different ideas, different perceptions, different technologies, and accelerate them, make sure that they are working with the market under these specific needs and not under different strange ideas. What are the financial structures that we actually need in order to make sure that these initiatives actually can reach the market and not die down the road because of lack of financial infrastructure?
Well, I think that's the big question. How do you create an environment where these young researchers are willing to take the risk, and the risk isn't just on the private market, because at the end of the day, the government is going to be the ultimate payer, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid in the US, through the insurance companies in Israel, and they have a very good motivation to create a very efficient and effective healthcare system. And therefore, they have a very big motivation to help take some of the risk off in the early stages. So Israel in particular has created these private incubator programs, originally from the Russian immigration, but now dealing with a lot of the different social issues in Israel. Ours in particular, NGT3, is focused in on biotech and medical device, and also trying to bring a lot of the Israeli Arab sector into the Israeli economy. But at the same time, and we have a great relationship with the government in that sense, because if we both like the company, we'll invest $120,000 and the government will invest $700,000 in that company. We get half the company, and the company eventually pays the government back through a royalty stream, assuming that it actually succeeds. So that's a great partnership there with the government really helping mitigate the risk early on, but then benefiting eventually from whatever the new device is. And under this new scheme where financial resources and reimbursements, for instance, are very much limited, take something like a colonoscopy where if it doesn't work, if you can't do it the first time, then you don't get paid the second time. The government pays you once and that's it. Or the insurance pays you once and that's it. How can we create tools that will actually allow that to happen the first time, regardless of you're prepped correctly or not, or there's other issues going on? Or how do you get a preterm baby out of the NICU 7 days early in order to then cut down the cost and be much better for the baby, and all along the system saves an awful lot of money all the way down the line. So the key really is to create a partnership with the government on these early stages where they're providing and taking funds and taking a lot of the risk away. Then the second part of that really is, and this is where the capital markets come in, you have this valley of death of after you've gone through the incubator period of 2 or 3 years and the returns aren't quite right for the VCs or whatever, then how do you fund these companies until they're late stage, in which case the risk is mitigated and more other people are interested in investing in it. So that's another area where the government could certainly become involved and create a funding stream, or working with the capital markets, create a funding stream in order to help this little area right here in the middle.
Great. Roger, what would be effective models of this collaboration between the government, financial institutions, maybe corporates, of course philanthropy, that we should consider and should prepare ourselves to promote in order to boost this process?
So Israel already has a model of this in the Israel Life Sciences Fund, which was launched a few years ago. Oradar and some other colleagues put together a fund which is a private-public partnership that, in a way, on a small scale, achieved that sort of risk mitigation by having the government take a first loss position and also match some funding, and that was a very effective approach. Those types of approaches, again, they rely primarily on VC, and for smaller problems or more certain problems, they work very well. We worked on something that was a little bit more geared towards this valley of death problem, right, that we talked about. And actually, if I could have slide 14. So this is a super highly stylized picture of how a drug gets approved. And it starts in somebody's lab as a compound, and then it goes into phase 1 testing. Phase 1 testing involves testing on healthy people to make sure it doesn't make them sick. Phase 2 testing then involves giving the drug to people that have a certain indication. Whoops, go back, please. Have a certain indication. And if that indication seems to be improved by taking this medication, that's considered a good thing. It's called efficacy. And then the testing, the last phase, phase 3, is really a large-scale trial to really determine whether this is better than what's currently available. And finally, if all that goes well, there's a few other steps and it gets approved. Now, every time the drug hops from one of those points to another point, one of two things can happen. Either it turns out the test doesn't work and the drug fails, it's withdrawn, or it could turn out that the tests were successful and you move to the next phase, and when that happens, the drug is worth more money. The valley of death comes in those early phases, because the chance of failure, particularly for drugs like for oncology and things like that, very high. about 7% success rate, 6% success rate from the time something's in a test tube to the time it gets out into a drug. And it can take a really long time. Now, drug companies like to come in sort of in phase 2 and phase 3 because by then you're down to 1 in 4, 1 in 5 chance of success, and that's a pretty good bet. And so the result is that drug companies tend to pick things up at the point where they're most likely to succeed. And as a result, folks want to sell to drug companies drugs that are most likely to succeed. And they do what, in some cases, movie companies have been doing. How many people saw the advertisement for Godzilla? That's the 3rd remake of Godzilla. You know, you wouldn't have thought you needed 3 movies about a giant dinosaur destroying New York. But it turns out that people like to go to those movies, and it's a pretty sure thing. And it's a lot easier to do that than to fund an indie film that may or may not make money. Now, this whole process costs a lot of money. And it's not just money up front, but it's money over the course of the process. And so we had this idea that any one of these compounds by themselves is pretty risky. But if a drug is successful, it's extremely profitable, sometimes ridiculously profitable, billions of dollars a year sometimes, hundreds of millions almost certainly, for many years. So if you do get that drug that succeeds, you make a lot of money. So on average, you actually can do well. It's just that you don't get to enjoy the average very often because there's so much risk. And that's why it's very hard to pick 1 or 2 drugs. So if we go to the next slide, skip again, please. Sorry, slide, we're going to skip this stuff. So slide 19, please. So if you put a bunch of these drugs in a portfolio, the average stays the same. So you still get that pretty attractive expected return. But just like when you buy a mutual fund instead of a single stock, the variance goes down quite a bit. And when the variance goes down, you become much more certain of getting a return. Although you don't get the big, 500% returns, you're getting a much more reasonable return that's more in line with the average. And the way that works is, if we can click there, you can issue some debt and equity, back that by a portfolio of research compounds, either from universities or from small startups. Click. Click again, please. All right, that then becomes owned by the issuing entity. And then over the course of time, those drugs continue to go through that process. Most of them fail, a few of them succeed. And when they succeed, click, they make a little bit of money, and you can use that money to pay back the bonds. But most importantly, click, you get a bit of extra money that can then go to start funding the next phase of trials. Click. And that keeps going. Click. And it keeps going throughout the end of the transaction. When the transaction is done, you've got a bunch of compounds that have made it through this process and have become drugs, and are either attractive to be sold directly to the market or attractive to be sold to late-stage investors like pharmaceutical companies. Now, we found that, click, click, click. We found that when we do this in our simulations, and we've got 3 or 4 papers on this, you can actually generate a reasonable return for both equity and debt holders. But more importantly, you can actually get a lot of drugs through the process. Now, I'm saying drugs. This could be clean energy. It could be water technology. Anything that takes a long time to develop but has a big payoff and a low probability of success works pretty well in this structure. Some of our research also showed that for most other problems besides cancer, we chose cancer for a number of reasons. But if you look at other types of problems, for example, if you look at the type of drug development that's done for orphan drugs, where the success rates are very much higher, you need much, much smaller portfolios, and you have much higher success rates and much more profitable investment properties. Also, if you have a government guarantee, we talked about the government guarantees dramatically improve the performance of these as well. What's nice about this structure, though, is that the folks that buy those securities are not the experts in biotech. They're not the VC guys or the private equity guys. They're large institutional investors who don't need those huge returns, but who are very attracted by orthogonal or uncorrelated returns in different areas. And as a result of that, rather than talking about the several $100 billion of venture capital that's available, you can talk about the several $100 trillion of fixed income investments that are available. And so that's the idea. This was a proof of concept. It turns out people found it interesting. There are a bunch of projects going on now to try to implement this. Some of them are actually taking place in Israel. Some of them are taking place in California and a bunch of other places. So we're guardedly optimistic, I think, that this is going to be at least the start of some new ways of financing not just drug research, but also in general innovation.
Great. I think we have a lot of good examples for financial innovation. Let's take it for a moment back to what is Israel doing today, and as a representative of the Clalit Healthcare Services, what are we doing specifically in order to make sure that we will have this effective innovation environment? And actually, I see that Yaron Neudorfer, the head of the Israel Social Bond, sitting with us, so maybe we'll give him also 2 minutes, 3 minutes to talk about his system, which also, from my perspective, is wonderful example for financial innovation in health. Okay? Good. So.
Okay, so who's
No,
first?
you'll start.
I thought the guys with the money are the first. Anyway, number 25.
This is the innovative
please.
part about it.
25, please. And I'll-
Okay, there.
Okay, so again, an unnecessary slide because it's a direct outcome of what I've said before. And what we are trying to do as of 2015 to really establish one large center equipped with all our databases, unidentified, et cetera, to expose ourselves to partners. We already have initial agreement from the Weizmann Institute, from 1 or even 2 universities who are willing to participate and put some money in it. We are looking for other partnerships from other companies, hopefully also from the government. And actually, listening to you now, it's a kind of a portfolio, because hopefully we'll succeed to attracting a large number of people to create this portfolio. So in a kind of modified concept. Meanwhile, we are at advanced stages of planning it, and I'm quite confident that we'll do it. The other thing is to try and look at other models of financing, and before Yaron will speak, I'll talk about one experiment we are conducting together related to social impact bonds to raise money for a specific program on prevention of development of diabetes in pre-diabetic people. So I'll just introduce the clinical subject and then let you talk about the financial issue. As it is well known that, like in our country, there are almost 500,000 diabetics, and there is a similar number of pre-diabetics, meaning that something is wrong, but it hasn't been detected or has been detected as a predilection, and can you do something to prevent the diabetes from appearing? Or even if it will appear eventually, do you do something to postpone the appearance and to slow the rate of deterioration? So in this specific endeavor, what we are trying to do, we have a tool to identify high-risk pre-diabetic patients whose chances of becoming diabetic are much higher than all the rest, and we are going to intervene. Again, the intervention is a combination of low-tech and high-tech issues, but it needs money. And Yaron helped us with Social Impact Bonds Israel to create a format of raising money for this. And would you please tell us a little bit about it?
Can we have the mic, please?
So thanks very much for this non-classical approach to a panel, using somebody's wire. So we in social finance. No, you said.
No. Do you have a mic?
So we in social finance Israel. There we go.
There is much more innovation is not a good thing always.
No, this is answer to any need that you may have. So in social finance Israel, we have developed a model really to tackle type 2 diabetes in pre-diabetics, as Professor Bitterman said, together with Kupat Cholim Clalit and some other leading professionals in the healthcare system about type 2 diabetes. Basically, we use, as a classical social impact bond model, we raise money from private investors. We choose the right service providers to do a very intensive 1-year-long intervention program with a specific group that is chosen after analyzing big data analysis that stays within Kupat Cholim in their database. So I think it connects both the financial aspects and the big data analysis aspect in this specific project. Professor Bitterman mentioned earlier that they cover some 52% of the market in Israel in patients. However, they do cover some 75% in diabetics. So that's exactly the right database that we want to approach and use in order to take those that are in a higher risk, but some of them do not even know that they are pre-diabetics. As I said, it's a 1-year-long program, very intensive, that combines everything that you can imagine. Lifestyle changing, more fibers, more diet, more fitness, but it also combines some high-tech technology such as health bracelets to analyze your level of activity and be able to give you a very, very personalized care. So this is the first part. The second part of the bond is basically how do we generate returns to the investors. So basically what we say is that if this succeeds vis-a-vis a control group, savings are generated in 3 different layers. The first layer is really savings that are generated to the HMOs or the insurance companies, less hospitalization days, less procedures, and less medication. The second layer is created to what we call in Israel Bituach Leumi, or national insurance, that basically prevents them from paying more and more disabled allowances for people who are being in a severe diabetic stage. And the third layer is really savings that are generated to the government or to the economy. As you can imagine, loss of working days, loss of productivity, people who are disabled, they cannot go back into the labor force. So if we take some part of those savings that are created to these 3 entities or in these 3 layers and return them back to investors as a return on their initial investment, we can generate a very effective funding system to tackle and prevent, to deal with prevention of many other issues and many other diseases. Maybe one last sentence, and thanks again for giving me the opportunity to present it. The model that we developed is not only developed for Israel. As you can imagine, type 2 diabetes is growing very much worldwide. We were invited to present this project in a G8 forum in London back in December. It created a lot of excitement worldwide, and now we're about to see who will be the first country to really develop it. Thank you very much.
Great. So, as you see, the idea that we're all experiencing extensive paradigm shift, and this paradigm shift basically manifested both in the practice, on the interface, the classical interface between the patient and the doctor. This paradigm shift manifested in policy. Which policies can support these processes? In financial models, and who are the partners who are bringing this innovation into the cycle, and so on and so forth. The interesting part about it is that Israel, we believe, is actually very well located to play this role. And as you can hear, there are different initial points that already taking place. Within 3 months from now, we are launching a very big policy program with the government, with most of the universities in Israel, the health service providers, and pretty wide cycle of corporates who all together trying to take this closed system of health and actually build it as under the vision of the best place to innovate it. I think this is the right time to open the panel for questions. You're more than welcome to ask, and of course we will be at your service after the panel done to answer for further questions.
Any questions?
I'm Harlan Weissman. I don't really have a question, I'll just comment. I think in the last example demonstrated that you have a unique opportunity to take a systems approach as opposed to an individual technology approach. One of the areas that's been somewhat problematic in Israel is it's a great generator of ideas and technologies, but some fraction of it, sometimes small, sometimes large. The technology works, it does what it's supposed to do, but nobody wants it. And what I mean by nobody wants it, you can find doctors maybe who want it, but nobody wants to pay for it. So if it was available and free, people would use it. The opportunity to turn Israeli innovation on a systems level, and be able to have the the laboratory be the hospital system in which you're testing it, I think is a very good opportunity.
I guess this is what you meant in your previous comment about we should focus these innovations, these technological capacities on real needs and not just on nice ideas of wild entrepreneurs.
I mean, we get a lot of people giving us ideas that they want to bring into the incubator and start a company on, but it's kind of random in that it's whatever they thought of. If we're working together with the healthcare system, then they're bringing us the issues that they have, and we're now going and finding the entrepreneurs who are going to start those companies and create those solutions, and then we have the system set up to get them in and get them started and take the early risk.
Well, just an idea around that general approach is you have the entrepreneur, the current system in the incubators is that people, or even within the institutions, like the Technion and others, is that you come pitch your idea and hope that you get funded. Because if you did take this true systems approach, you could reverse it and just say, here are the problems, help us solve it.
Right.
Yeah,
that's the idea.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is very fascinating because it raises an important question, and that is, where does disruptive innovation come from? You can leave it to the market, you can leave it to the Steve Jobs and the Sergey Brin of this world, or you can perhaps leverage the power of government to make it happen. And we've got, I think, a couple of beautiful examples that have not been properly exploited with the role of which are the role of the military in demanding disruptive innovation. We're seeing it here in the US with DARPA, the most amazing and productive discovery engine ever invented. I mean, this is 140 scientists running on a shoestring, and they've changed the world in the last 50 years. And the way they've done it is the government basically says, hey, these are the problems that we're trying to solve. We're not going to tell you how to solve them. You come up with solution, and we'll fund, to a limited extent, the development of the solution. But in order to get any of that money, it has to be disruptive. If it is not disruptive, we won't give you a dime. And I think the IDF in Israel has also been a demander of disruptive innovation for obvious reasons, and has paid off very nicely, perhaps not in the biomedical area, but in the electronics and aerospace area and that sort of thing. So it makes one wonder if that model could be applied to biomedical innovation. If the government in Israel or in the US or anywhere else could decide, hey, these are the real tough problem that we're trying to solve. It could be Alzheimer, it could be diabetes, it could be whatever. And by the way, we have some money to fund research for the innovators of the world, but the only way to get that money is for you to come up with disruptive proposals.
I guess the value proposition is even a bit wider, because the idea is to start with this very specific need determination, take it, escort the development process by building this interface to the healthcare services, and after that serve as a very effective beta site in which you actually can show value. Taking all these three elements together, you're basically creating a holistic system that can take a nice idea and lead it to the market, show the value, and then take it elsewhere to the world. For Israel, it will be a wonderful process to generate innovation and upgrade its systems. For the world, it could be a very effective accelerator of real innovation. Yes?
May I add?
Yeah, sure.
To connect the
Glenn,
two
just
things.
a moment,
I'm
please.
sorry.
If I can add to the answer, the very realistic problem that we are trying to solve is the expenditure on the healthcare system. The government has his fiscal restrictions, and we are asking ourselves, how can we provide more efficient healthcare with lower expenses? So the problem is very concrete, and we are thinking about changing the function of production of these services in a way that people will get more and it will cost us less. So I think that in this case we have very real initiative and motivation to promote this kind of activities.
This is a question really to Chaim and also to Roger. Is there an interface in actually the data management? We saw it obviously in the case of of what Yaron Nordorfer from Social Finance Israel was talking about on the type 2 diabetes, of where that could add value in tracking based and embedded in the health delivery system. But is there also a connection where some of the risk mitigation and de-risking at the various stages of development of some of the key cures in global health, both in infectious and in chronic diseases, for which we have a great patent and data pool and capability to generate more, to have evidence-based and results-based for clinical trials, for easier transition from various phases of development? And Chaim, as Chief Medical Officer, and then from the financing perspective, would overcoming those information asymmetries be helpful to accelerate the medical solution process, for which we think we might have a financial solution in this structured product?
Well, I'm not trying to be evasive, but I think it's mostly a financial issue, because the will is there, the capabilities are there, and the financial needs are not that extreme to come up with initial solutions. The problem is, what do you do with it later? Right. And I think I should move the microphone to you.
But you do have a very diverse demography with a huge historical longitudinal database, and you can track interventions in specific populations.
Right, right.
Yeah, so here's the way I think about this is, there's a kind of a micro piece of it, and then a macro piece of it. And of course, economists always think micro, macro. So the micro piece is absolutely, the more information that you have. What I didn't show is, if you're trying to model this and you're trying to figure out what your returns will be and trying to get it into a form that will make investors comfortable, you've got to figure out what the risks are. What is the probability that a drug won't be successful? What is the probability that patients will respond to it? Can I select a smaller sample of patients to make the drug trial less expensive? All these types of things, which are obviously the key problems that we're struggling with right now on the big data side. So that's the first bit of it, and that's the micro piece. On a macro level, though, I actually think that the last piece, I don't think it's 3 pieces, I think it's 4 pieces in that ecosystem, because I've mentioned today 2 initiatives in Israel that are already using innovative financial technology to fund biomedical research of various sorts. Yaron mentioned one, and I mentioned the Life Sciences Fund. Israel is leading the world right now in developing new innovative ways to fund biomedical research and medical technology. And the one that we've proposed is another one that we're talking about as well. But it could well be the case that Israel becomes the place you go to do your trials, and then when it's time to get funded, there's a robust financial architecture infrastructure that can actually facilitate funding through capital markets. And that would also serve to keep a lot of the innovation local, as opposed to being expatriated to large multinationals that buy out because there's no funding. So I think there's this micro piece, which is, we could build better models, we could understand things better for risk, but I think on the macro level, there's a much more exciting opportunity, which is actually, I think, at this point in history, somewhat unique. Well, it can't be somewhat unique. Is unusual, and Israel is in the lead in many ways in that area as well.
We have last question. Oh. Anyone else? Thanks a lot.
Thank you.